Hello, I'm Alma Angeles and you're watching Eagle News International. Good evening, CJ.
Good evening, Alma, and good evening to everyone joining the broadcast tonight. Here are the headlines.
Police arrested more than 800 people worldwide in a huge global sting involving encrypted phones that were secretly planted by the FBI, according to law enforcement agencies.
An atmospheric research station in Hawaii recorded its highest concentrations of carbon dioxide since accurate measurements began 63 years ago, according to a government agency, adding that the coronavirus pandemic had rarely impacted rising levels of the greenhouse gas.
Quezon City Mayor Joy Belmonte said the city government has so far confirmed 86 COVID-positive residents who were at the food distribution event of Councilor Franz Pumaren in Barangay Matandang Balara on May 25.
Changes your relationship with this planet.
And billionaire Jeff Bezos announced plans to fly into space next month on a rocket built by his company Blue Origin, fulfilling what he said was a lifelong dream.
Because we're...
First, here in the country's total number of recovered coronavirus disease cases has reached 1,202,257 after 7,122 more recoveries were reported today. In its latest case bulletin, the Department of Health noted that recoveries account for 93.9% of the total case COVID count, which has reached 280,773 since the start of the pandemic last year. The agency also reported 4,777 new cases, bringing the total number of active cases to 56,452. About 93.2% of these active cases are mild, 2.5% are asymptomatic, 1.3% are critical, 1.7% are severe, and 1.19% are moderate. Some 95 new deaths were also reported, pushing the country's total number of COVID fatalities to 22,064. According to the DOH data, on June 6, about 14.3% of 29,125 who were tested turned out positive for COVID-19.
In other news, Quezon City Mayor Joy Belmonte said the city government has so far confirmed 86 COVID-19 positive residents who were at the food distribution event of Councilor Franz Pumaren in Barangay Matandang Balara on May 25th of this year. During the Laging Handa briefing or public briefing aired over state-run PTV4 on Tuesday, Belmonte, however, said Pumaren has been cleared by the Quezon City Police District of health protocol violations. Based on the QCPD investigation, Pumaren properly coordinated with law enforcers and the authorities before the event. Take a look.
Gusto ko rin lang munang banggitin na inabsuelto po ng Quezon City Police District si Konsehal Franz Pumaren sapagkat kanilang napagpasyahan that he did not act irresponsibly naman. Nagkaroon naman po ng sapat na pakikipag-ugnayan sa kapulisan at sa iba pa nating law enforcers. Nagkataon lang kasi na umulan ng malakas kung kaya't nagkaroon ng kaguluhan. But having said that, of course, I do believe that was a super spreader event dahil nung nagbalik ang mga tao sa kanilang linya ay medyo dikit-dikit na po sila, wala na pong social distancing, crowded na po talaga at yung iba ay dahil nabasa ang kanilang mga face shields at face masks ay medyo naging pabaya. And because of that, we have so far already identified 86 positive cases out of 953 that were tested doon sa event na yan. At doon sa tanong mo naman na are we sure we can test everyone? The answer is no kasi wala pong maayos na contact tracing na naisagawa. Wala pong listahan ng mga pangalan ng mga nag-attend ng ayudang yan at lahat ng mga shortcomings na nakita natin at pagkukulang ay atin na pong na-address ngayon through additional guidelines. But of course, tapos na po kasi yung super spreader na yan and we just have to make the most of what we have at that time. So ang ginagawa po ng mga contact tracers natin and they're working backwards, no? Interviewing all the positive patients and trying to identify as many as possible of those that were present at that particular ayuda. Also, we noticed na marami din sa mga pumila sa ayuda pala na yan ay hindi taga Matandang Balara. Marami din palang taga ibang mga barangay kung kaya't hirap kaming hanapin lahat.
An estimated 950 people attended the event, but not everyone was tested as there was no list of names and contact information. Belmonte assured they learned their lessons and additional guidelines have been formulated. She also said giving food aid is not prohibited.
Staying in the country, the Philippines is eyeing about 29 million for pediatric vaccination using the CoronaVac, Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna jabs. Secretary Carlito Galvez Jr., Chief Implementer of the National Task Force against COVID-19, said to be included are those aged 3 to 17 years old. Again, let's listen in.
So ito po yung mga balita na yung Moderna, meron po silang ginagawang clinical trial for ages 12 to 17. And then kahapon po, ang Sinovac ay naglabas po ng magandang balita na China has already approved for emergency use of the Sinovac from 3 years old to 17 years old. And then sa UK, ina-approve na po na yung Pfizer ay magamit po sa 12 to 15. And I believe the US also using Pfizer for 12 years old and above.
Now, on Tuesday, Health Undersecretary Maria Rosario Verire confirmed the Food and Drug Administration approved the emergency use authorization for Pfizer BioNTech for the age 12 to 15 bracket. She also emphasized the government's vaccine cluster through National Task Force against COVID-19 Chief Implementer Secretary Galvez would secure the doses necessary to vaccinate all eligible population for free.
Now, in other news, Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni further toughened virus curbs on Sunday night, including ordering the closure of schools to stem a worrying rise in local transmissions. Schools will be closed from Monday for 6 weeks, and most gatherings, save for weddings and funerals in small groups, were banned. Non-essential travel between districts was suspended, and a 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. curfew will remain in force until mid-July. Most shops and markets remain open provided they comply with government health regulations, but bars will remain closed. Uganda had kept its COVID-19 cases relatively low and was spared the worst of the pandemic after adopting one of Africa's tightest lockdowns, but it eased the measures as cases dropped. However, infections have soared in recent weeks with a sharp increase in severe cases.
Meanwhile, China has approved the emergency use of a COVID-19 vaccine for those as young as 3. The drug maker confirmed this today, making it the first country to offer jabs to young children. Since the coronavirus first emerged in central China, Beijing has mostly managed to bring the country's outbreak under control and has administered over 777 million vaccine doses after a sluggish start. A spokesperson for Sinovac told AFP its vaccine had been approved for use on children. And Chinese officials have said they are aiming to inoculate 70% of the population of 1.41 billion by the end of this year. The World Health Organization has approved both the Sinopharm and Sinovac vaccines for emergency use in adults age 18 and older, and both jabs are being administered in several countries around the world. And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Events happen around us all the time, in our community, in our country, around the world. Events that affect people, move communities, or simply inspire us. Interesting events that people need to know. In these interesting times, we continue to be a competent partner in delivering news about these events. Fast, accurate, balanced, eagle news, because we live in interesting times.
Welcome back to the news. Pakistani engineers Tuesday combed the mangled wreckage of two trains that collided in a remote farming region, an accident that killed dozens and highlighted huge safety problems on the nation's dilapidated rail network. At least 63 people died early Monday when a high-speed passenger train knifed through carriages of another express that had derailed minutes earlier near Daharki in Sindh province. The Milyat Express was heading from Karachi to Sargodha when it derailed, its carriages strewn over the tracks as the Sir Syed Express from Rawalpindi arrived minutes later in the opposite direction, smashing into it. It is not known what caused the Milyat Express to jump its tracks, but Interior Minister Sheikh Rashid, a former railways minister, described that section of the line as a shambles, which current Minister Azam Swati called it really dangerous. Usman Abdullah, the Deputy Provincial Commissioner, said that 63 people had died in the accident, issuing two lists that named 51 victims and marked 12 others as unidentified. They ranged from a months-old infant to a woman who was 81 years old. Pakistan Railways spokesman Ijaz Shah said the families of those killed would receive compensation of 1.5 million rupees or around $9,600.
Back here in the country, unless Communist New People's Army rebels stop attacking government forces and civilians, no peace talks can ever succeed. That according to President Duterte on Monday night. President Duterte made the statement as he condemned the ambush of a unit of the 85th Infantry Battalion by the NPA rebels in Buena Vista Town in Quezon Province last Saturday. Take a look.
June 5, while on a food aid mission in Buena Vista, Quezon Province, our soldiers were attacked again by the NPA rebels. What you can do, I can do better 10 times over. No peace talks can ever succeed under me or under any other president if you do not stop attacking government forces and even civilian leaders.
Now, he said he couldn't understand why NPA, armed wing of the Communist Party of the Philippines, would attack soldiers who were simply in the town to distribute food aid and other needs in the middle of a pandemic. Reports show that the Soldiers and Citizens Armed Forces Geographical Unit, or CAFGU personnel, were ambushed by NPA rebels in the village of Batabatsur around 11:40 a.m. June 5 after coming from a community gift-giving activity. The government forces were heading back to the police station at the town center for debriefing and lunch break when they were attacked. Peace talks between the national government and the CPP's political wing, the National Democratic Front, or the NDF, have been intermittent since 1986. And the president held a series of peace negotiations with the NDF, but was forced to terminate the talks following the relentless NPA attacks against government troops and civilians. Through Proclamation 360 signed on November 23, 2017, President Duterte formally ended the peace dialogue with the NDF. The termination of peace talks was followed by the December 5, 2017 signing of Proclamation 374 that declared the CPP-NPA as a terror organization. The CPP-NPA is listed as a terrorist organization by the U.S., the European Union, the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the Philippines.
In other news, far-left trade unionist Pedro Castillo took a narrow lead on Monday in Peru's presidential runoff election against right-wing populist Keiko Fujimori, who alleged fraud in the vote count. With 94.8% of ballots counted after Sunday's vote, Castillo was ahead of Fujimori with 50.2% compared with her 49.7%, though there could be a prolonged wait for the final outcome. Fujimori raised allegations of irregularities and signs of fraud at a press conference on Monday evening, claiming she had evidence of a clear intention to boycott the popular will in the election. Take a look.
Tenemos que ser respetuosos de la voluntad popular y ser el primero en hacer respetar la voluntad del pueblo peruano.
Hemos notado que ha habido una estrategia de parte de Perú Libre para distorsionar o dilatar los resultados que reflejen la voluntad popular. Y por eso es importante alertar a la ciudadanía para que además nos pueda alertar si es que han habido otro tipo de sucesos en cada una de las regiones.
The candidates have polar opposite recovery plans. Fujimori, the daughter of corruption, convicted and jailed ex-president Alberto Fujimori, backs a neoliberal economic model of tax cuts and boosting private activity to generate jobs. Castillo has pledged to nationalize vital industries, raise taxes, and increase state regulation. Favored by the business sector and middle classes, Fujimori, her bastion is the capital Lima, sought to portray Castillo as a communist threat, warning Peru risks becoming a new Venezuela or North Korea. Rural-based Castillo, in turn, pointed to the Fujimori family's history of corruption scandals. Keiko Fujimori is under investigation over campaign funding in her 2011 and 2016 presidential bids.
And after weeks of political wrangling, the Israeli parliament will vote on Sunday on whether to install a change coalition and end Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's record 12 consecutive years in power. Announcing the date for the confidence vote on Tuesday, Speaker Yariv Levin, a Netanyahu ally, said a special session of parliament would debate and vote on the fragile 8-party alliance. If the crunch vote hands a majority to the coalition, which is united only by hostility to Netanyahu's rule, it would spell the end of an era. The divisive incumbent has dominated Israeli politics for more than a decade, pushing it firmly to the right. And since the coalition was announced last week, Netanyahu has lived up to his reputation as a ruthless political operator, piling pressure on right-wingers within its ranks to reject this, quote, dangerous left-wing government. The anti-Netanyahu bloc includes 3 right-wing, 2 centrist, and 2 left-wing parties, along with an Arab Islamic conservative party. On paper, it commands a wafer-thin majority, but Netanyahu has urged his supporters to shame right-wing lawmakers in its ranks into returning to the fold under his leadership. If the government is confirmed, Netanyahu's right-wing opponent, Naftali Bennett, would serve as premier for 2 years, after which the Change Coalition centrist architect Yair Lapid would take over. Netanyahu, who faces corruption charges that would result in jail time, has refused to go without a messy fight. Naftali Bennett, who served as Netanyahu's aide before turning against him, has urged his former boss to let go.
To the U.S. now, where the country's Supreme Court unanimously ruled that people who illegally migrated to the United States for humanitarian reasons are ineligible to apply for a green card to become permanent residents. In a 9-0 decision, the justices said federal law protects these immigrants from deportation and it allows them to obtain a work permit, but it does not give them a right to lawful permanent status unless they are here pursuant to a lawful admission. That means TPs, or temporary protected status recipients, who entered the country legally as students or tourists and stayed under TPs may obtain a green card, said Justice Elena Kagan. But the same is not true of those who entered illegally. Temporary protected status has been extended to about 320,000 immigrants from El Salvador, Haiti, Honduras, Nepal, Nicaragua, Sudan, Venezuela, and Yemen. But lower courts had been divided over whether these migrants, many of whom have lived there for decades, may apply for and receive lawful permanent status.
In other news, the United States today approved a drug called Aduhelm to treat patients with Alzheimer's, the first new medicine against the disease in almost 2 decades, and the first to address cognitive decline linked to the condition. The decision was highly anticipated but also contentious because an independent expert panel convened by the Regulatory Food and Drug Administration last November found insufficient evidence of the benefit and recommended against approval of that drug. Aduhelm, a monoclonal antibody also known by its generic name, aducanumab, that is administered intravenously, was tested in 2 late-stage human trials known as phase 3 trials. And it showed a reduction in cognitive decline in one, but not the other. But in all studies, it convincingly showed a reduction in the buildup of a protein called beta-amyloid in the brain tissue of Alzheimer's patients. One theory holds that Alzheimer's disease comes from an excessive accumulation of these proteins in some people's brains as they age and their immune systems decline. Providing such patients antibodies could therefore be a means to restore some of their capacity to clear the plaque buildup.
An atmospheric research station in Hawaii recorded its highest concentrations of carbon dioxide since accurate measurements began 63 years ago, according to a government agency, adding that the coronavirus pandemic had barely impacted rising levels of the greenhouse gas. The Mauna Loa Observatory is considered a benchmark sampling site because of its isolated location, far from pollution sources on a barren volcano in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The WMO said most extreme weather events are happening against a backdrop of climate change. Look.
Europe, as we probably know, are living in the middle of it. Europe had its coldest spring since 2013. The average March to May temperature was 0.45 degrees Celsius below the 1991 to 2020 average. And this is according to a report from the European Centre for Medium Range Weather Forecasts Copernicus Climate Change Service. Europe also had a cooler than average May, obviously doesn't mean that everywhere in the globe was cooler than average. We saw, high temperatures, Northern Africa, the Middle East, Northern Western Russian, and parts of Greenland. And the global average temperature in May was slightly above the long-term average. As I've said before, and I will no doubt say it again, just because this year has got off to a relatively cool start by recent standards does not mean that we've hit the pause button on climate change. Climate change is continuing. One of the key drivers of climate change, as we know, is greenhouse gas concentrations. And yesterday, we saw the release of very worrying figures from Mauna Loa, which is the world's oldest benchmark atmospheric monitoring station. It has the longest track record of monitoring greenhouse gases. And according to the new figures, the May monthly average concentrations of CO2 in the atmosphere at Mauna Loa, at this one particular site, was 419.13 parts per million. That's up, and it's quite a considerable rise, that's up from 417.31 parts per million in May of last year's. So these are figures not from WMO, they're figures from the US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, which are responsible for Mauna Loa. It doesn't mean that the global average for May is going to be that high. The global average is slightly lower because of the southern hemisphere, but the Mauna Loa figure is indicative of where we're heading, and that is very clearly in the wrong direction. These are more than just statistics, and people might say, well, so what, parts per million. The fact that CO2 has such a long lifetime in the atmosphere does mean that future generations, and we're not just talking about one or two, we're talking about many generations, will be committed to seeing more impacts of climate change. So that means rising temperatures, more extreme weather, melting ice, rising sea level, and all the associated impacts.
Now, with chronic drought drying up rivers earlier than usual this year, California is scaling up a drastic operation to help its famous Chinook salmon reach the Pacific, transporting the fry by road in dozens of large tanker trucks. Take a look.
Okay, well, this is the beginning of the fish ladder. This is what we call the fish barrier dam, and this is the terminal end of the migration of the salmon for the Feather River. Hold there, and then they migrate, and they actually feel the current of this ladder, and then the fish will migrate up because the instinct of the fish is to go upstream when they're ready to spawn. This attracts the fish so we can take the eggs. So in order for the fish to make it to where we need to take the eggs, this needs to happen. The water needs to be flowing and the fish need to go up. We want to make sure that we have the best available chance for this fish because we don't know what's going to happen. We don't have any rain, so the water temperatures are going to be a little bit higher. The water is going to be, the river's going to be a little bit lower than normal. So we're trying to give them the best chance possible. This is our incubator stack. This is where the eggs get put in after we once we spawn them, the eggs come to this room and they stay here until they hatch. They stay here about 60 days, 30 to 60 days. And each of these trays hold about 100,000 eggs. So each incubator stack can hold anywhere from 100,000 to 150,000 eggs in each stack. Our hatchery building can hold up to about 20 million eggs.
The tasty migratory fish are typically born in rivers, swim to the ocean where they reach maturity, and can remain for several years before returning to their native rivers to spawn and die. But drought-hit rivers with too little flow or unusually warm water can fatally disrupt that cycle, causing California's Fish and Wildlife Department to take the proactive measure of trucking millions of hatchery-raised juvenile salmon to the sea. Anna Kastner said trucking young salmon to downstream release sites has proven to be one of the best ways to increase survival to the ocean during dry conditions.
Officials said today lightning strikes killed 27 people and four passengers on a flight were hospitalized after severe turbulence during monsoon storms in eastern India. Lightning strikes during the June to September annual monsoon are fairly common in India. Officials said West Bengal was hit by thunderstorms late Monday with lightning strikes in parts of the state. Many of the 27 killed on Monday evening in the state were farmers and working in the fields, according to West Bengal Disaster Management Minister Javed Ahmed Khan. Officials also said a flight from the western city of Mumbai to Kolkata, the capital of West Bengal, was caught in the storm as it was about to land. 8 passengers were injured, with 4 taken to hospital. Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced financial compensation for the families of the victims and those who were injured. Eagle News will be back with more stories. Please don't go away.
It's time to take one step further and face the impossible. Time to search the unknown and fight for the truth. Time to overcome boundaries and connect the world. It's time for DW News.
Samahan sina Wedge Kujamat,
itong balitang panggising sa ulo ng mga balita.
Apple David,
Sa 60 katao ang isinugod sa ospital.
Phoebe Publico,
Economic sabotage ang mga tiwaling negosyante.
at Cristel Fesalbon.
Pagpresyo ng gulay, makakausap natin
Para ihatid sa inyo ang mga kaganapan at pangyayari sa bansa at sa iba't ibang panig ng mundo. Mga napapanahong isyu ng bayan. May balitang sports, entertainment at iba pang kaalaman. Simula Lunes hanggang Biyernes, alas 5 ng umaga sa paborito nyong morning show, Pambansang Almusal, dito sa Net 25.
Pambansang Almusal.
Malacanang expressed confidence today that the government's three-pronged strategy would help create more job opportunities for unemployed Filipinos. This after the country recorded around 4.14 million jobless Filipinos in April this year, higher than the 3.44 million registered in March the same year. Presidential spokesperson Harry Roque said the rise in the number of unemployed Filipinos came no longer a surprise since stricter quarantine restrictions had been imposed in the past months due to rising virus infections. Take a look.
So hindi po nakapagtataka kung bakit tumaas muli ang unemployment rate kasi 3 buwan po tayo nag-ECQ, MECQ at GCQ with restrictions. No? So, pero kinakailangan naman po yan to achieve total health, no? Na masigurado na minimize poverty at the same time control the dramatic rise in cases dahil nga po sa mga new variants. No? So, lahat po ng mga datos na yan, unfortunately, dahil po sa pagsasara muli ng ekonomiya. At ang kinabukasan po natin, lalo na sa remaining buwan ng taong ito, talagang taong bayan po ang magdedesisyon dyan. Kinakailangan po talaga mask, hugas, iwas at bakuna. Pero ang strategiya naman po natin, unang-una is tangkain na i-control nga ang disease nito para lalo tayo makapagbukas ng ekonomiya. Pangalawa, patuloy pa rin po yung paggagamit natin ng fiscal at monetary policies na umaabot hanggang 2.7 trillion po ang ating binibigay na subsidiya. No? At pangatlo po, yung pinabibilis nga po natin ang pagbabakuna. At dahil nga po dito sa three-pronged strategy nito, tingin ko makakabawi tayo. Bagamat, gaya po sinabi ng World Bank, hindi siguro kasing bilis ng inaasahan natin nung ating plano dahil yung nagplano po tayo, hindi natin akalaing mag-ECQ at MECQ tayo sa ganitong kahabang panahon.
Maraming salamat po. Nag-ingat na rin po tayo sa mga magturumot.
The U.S. Justice Department announced that it had recovered more than half of the $4.4 million paid by Colonial Pipeline to Russia-based ransomware extortionists DarkSide, who had forced the shutdown of a major fuel network. Take a look.
After Colonial Pipeline's quick notification to law enforcement and pursuant to a seizure warrant issued by the United States District Court for the Northern District of California earlier today, the Department of Justice has found and recaptured the majority of the ransom Colonial paid to the DarkSide network in the wake of last month's ransomware attack.
Today, the FBI successfully seized criminal proceeds from a Bitcoin wallet that DarkSide ransomware actors used to collect a cyber ransom payment from a victim. Today, we deprived a cyber criminal enterprise of the object of their activity, their financial proceeds and funding. For financially motivated cyber criminals, especially those presumably located overseas, cutting off access to revenue is one of the most impactful consequences we can impose. In this case, the FBI has identified more than 90 victims across multiple U.S. critical infrastructure sectors. Those include manufacturing, legal, insurance, healthcare, and energy.
The seizure came 1 month after the group gave the U.S. government a security scare by breaking into the computer systems of Colonial and forcing the shutdown of its 5,500-mile pipeline serving much of the eastern United States. The shutdown caused short-term fuel shortages and drew attention to the broader threat that the burgeoning ransomware industry posed to essential infrastructure and services. The Justice Department said the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation was able to track the 75 Bitcoin Colonial paid in ransom, $4.4 million at the time, as it moved through multiple anonymous transfers. Eventually, it was able to seize from a cryptocurrency wallet 63.7 Bitcoin, which, due to the digital currency's fall over the past month, was only worth $2.3 million on Monday.
Meanwhile, police arrested more than 800 people worldwide in a huge global sting involving encrypted phones that were secretly planted by the FBI. Law enforcement agencies said this today. Officers were able to read the messages of global underworld figures in around 100 countries as they plotted drug deals, arms transfers, and gangland hits on the compromised ANOM devices. The evidence from Operation Trojan Shield prevented around 100 murders and foiled several large-scale drug shipments. According to officials from the FBI, the EU's police agency Europol, and other countries as far afield as Australia. Take a look.
Not only have we heard about the number of arrests and the number of seizures, but there were over 100 threats to life that were mitigated. And to give you an idea of the magnitude of our penetration, we were able to actually see photographs of hundreds of tons of cocaine that were concealed in shipments of fruit. We were able to see hundreds of kilos of cocaine that were concealed in canned goods. The success of Operation Trojan Shield is a result of tremendous innovation, dedication, and unprecedented international collaboration. And the results are staggering.
Details, but the figures are impressive. More than 12,000 encrypted devices used by more than 300 criminal syndicates operating in more than 100 countries. More than 27 million messages obtained and reviewed over 18 months.
Australian agencies helped get the phones in the hands of underworld influencers, including an Australian fugitive drug boss on the run in Turkey, in a bid to gain trust. The cover appeared to be blown in March 2021 when a blogger detailed Anom's security flaws and claimed it was a scam linked to Australia, the United States, and other members of the Five Eyes intelligence sharing network. The post was later deleted. The Australian Federal Police said that as a result of the operation, a total of 224 people were now facing more than 500 charges in Australia alone, while 6 underground drug labs were shut down and firearms and 45 million Australian dollars in cash was seized. Meanwhile, New Zealand Police Detective Superintendent Greg Williams also said 35 people had been arrested across the country. Police in New Zealand seized methamphetamine, firearms, and millions of dollars in cash and assets during their operation.
In other news, the websites of the White House, the British government, and international media were hit by outages on Tuesday. Messages such as Error 503, service unavailable, and connection failure appeared on the websites of CNN, the Financial Times, The Guardian, and France's Le Monde newspaper. The White House website had an error message but was available again later. The gov.uk websites remained unavailable at around 10:30 GMT. The BBC and the New York Times were temporarily inaccessible but also later returned.
Meanwhile, Apple said it is ramping up privacy and expanding features in new iPhone operating software to be released later this year. The new app privacy report feature was unveiled at the firm's annual developers conference, WWDC. The next version of iPhone operating software, called iOS 15, will have improved privacy features, including overviews of how apps access smartphone cameras or microphones, as well as data such as location or contacts. Apple added notifications on tracking in the current version of its mobile operating system, to the chagrin of app makers such as Facebook, that contended it would undermine the targeting of ads that support free online content. The update comes with Apple being challenged on several fronts over its control of apps on its ecosystem. Fortnite maker Epic Games has accused Apple in a lawsuit of having monopoly power with its app store that serves as the sole gateway onto iPhones or iPads.
Meanwhile, El Salvador may become the first country to make Bitcoin legal tender. President Nayib Bukele announced Saturday, saying he would soon propose a bill that could transform the remittance-dependent economy. Bukele said the move would make the Central American nation the first in the world to formally accept the cryptocurrency as legal money and would allow the financial inclusion of thousands of people who are outside the legal economy. The bill aims to create jobs, he said, in a country where 70% of the population does not have a bank account and works in the informal economy. The El Salvador government is yet to give details of the bill, which will require approval from a parliament dominated by the president's allies. Remittances from Salvadorans working overseas represent a major chunk of the economy, equivalent to roughly 22% of gross domestic product. According to Bukele, Bitcoin represented the fastest growing way to transfer those billions of dollars in remittances and to prevent millions from being lost to intermediaries.
A big Monday night for New York basketball as Knicks head coach Tom Thibodeau wins NBA Coach of the Year, plus the Nets crushed the Bucks to take a 2-0 series lead in the Eastern Conference semifinals. Here's Tenny Sumage for the report. Tenny?
Thanks, Alma. Nobody expected the New York Knicks to make the playoffs this season, but the defensive mind of Coach Tom Thibodeau helped the Knicks have their first winning season in 8 years. Coach Thibodeau beat out Phoenix Suns' Monty Williams to win this year's NBA Coach of the Year. This was the second time Coach Tibbs won the award, being the first time as a coach of the Chicago Bulls in 2011. And Thibodeau became the third coach in Knicks history to win the award. Take a look.
So in the 70s, I grew up watching Willis Reed and Walt Frazier, Dave DeBusschere, Red Holtzman. Those were my heroes. And then having the opportunity to come back here in the 90s with Jeff Van Gundy and that staff and Patrick Ewing and all the great players, Allen Houston, Larry Johnson, all those guys. I know what this team means to the city. So it's very meaningful. And to also have the group that we had this year, and just the way they played and they sacrificed and they played for each other, it was special. Every day you look forward to seeing these guys. They gave you everything they had. And whenever we fell short, the next day come right in and great determination and a willingness to succeed. And that's what made the group special.
It's whether you win by 2 or you win by 25, it's just one game. We held home court. We performed well in the 2 games. For our group, we want to keep growing, keep getting better. You know, we're still very new to one another, and so there's a lot of things that we can continue to refine and improve. And we'll go and try to keep improving in Milwaukee.
We know how important Game 3s are, and we know that their crowd is going to be in it from the second we get on the floor for warm-ups. And we know their guys play better and more comfortable when they're in there, sleep in their own beds and got their, same routines at home. So, we got our work cut out for us, but we're looking forward to it.
The Nets crushed the Bucks last night to take a 2-0 series lead, and Game 3 will resume in Milwaukee on Thursday. In New York, Tenny Sumagi, Eagle News. We live in interesting times. Back to you, Alma.
All right. Thank you very much, Tenny. Second time after a decade that he's named Coach of the Year. Congratulations to him. Thank you very much, Tenny. Looking forward to more updates coming from the NBA games. Thank you.
Yeah.
Finally, in our news, billionaire Jeff Bezos is the second richest man in the world. But nothing surprising about that. He just announced plans on Monday to fly into space next month on a rocket built by his company, Blue Origin, fulfilling what he said was a lifelong dream. Take a look.
Changes you. It changes your relationship with this planet, with humanity. It's one Earth. I want to go on this flight because it's a thing I've wanted to do all my life. It's an adventure. It's a big deal for me. I invited my brother to come on this first flight because we're closest friends.
I really want you to come with me. Would you?
Are you serious?
I am. I think it would be meaningful. Have my brother there.
I wasn't even expecting him to say that he was going to be on the first flight. And then when he asked me to go along, I was just awestruck.
Seriously? If you're willing, if you want to.
God.
Yeah.
What a remarkable opportunity, not only to have this adventure, but to be able to do it with my best friend.
The trip will last a total of 10 minutes, 4 of which passengers will spend above the Kármán line that marks the recognized boundary between Earth's atmosphere and space. After liftoff, the capsule separates from its booster, then spends 4 minutes at an altitude exceeding 60 miles or 100 kilometers, during which time those on board experience weightlessness and can observe the curvature of Earth from space. Passengers will be able to leave their seats and for a few minutes take advantage of the view through large windows. The capsule then gently falls to Earth.
That's exciting.
Exciting, yes. And, the competition between Bezos and Elon Musk being the richest man in the world does not stop there. Now they want to be, or they want to take the competition to space.
True.
Interesting what the, billionaires like them would spend their money on. But, we're just very excited about what they're going to be discovering there. This is our future.
We could try,
We can try it. Let's be friends with them. Well, that's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, I am CJ Hero. We'll be live again tomorrow, so please do join us then.
And at the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. We'll see you back tomorrow. I'm Alma Angeles, and
we live
in interesting times.
Factual.
We have to defeat the virus everywhere.
Timely information.